Hi everybody, welcome to the Photographer Academy, and today I'm going to be joined by Ian Cartwright, who is an amazing photographer in his own right. Ian and I have known each other for what seems a millennium through the British Institute of Professional Photography, the IPP, and other things and so on, and I'm really kind of so chuffed that he's able to join us today. So Ian, you're going to be talking about Aqua Babes. Tell us about your Aqua Babes then.
Yes, Mark, thanks very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure. Aqua Babes, it's something I didn't really expect I'd be doing when I started out my career, but I started off really veering away from advertising photography, which I've done for many a year, into including social photography, and through that, babies.
Well,
are you hearing me all right?
We can, it's perfect. Ian, tell us a little bit about your background first. You know, you talked a little bit about the advertising photography. You were a really part of a well-known duo going back to the 90s and things. Can you talk a little bit about your background and your history and how you got into photography before we get into the full presentation today?
Okay, no problem. Well, way back in, I think it was 1975, I embarked on my photography career from having been in college doing a BA in graphic design. I started off in a GP studio with all the various things, portraiture, exhibitions, PR photography, some advertising. Then I graduated from that through to probably more mail order than anything else, which is back end of the mail order catalogues. An incredibly intense course, if you like, in lighting, working quickly, compositions and images that sell. That developed further on to advertising photography, and eventually through a company which I and another photographer formed called Avalon Photography, where we pretty much specialised in advertising within the northern England area, mainly Manchester, but including Leeds and Liverpool, and photographing between us people and products, all hopefully with a high degree of skill on the lighting side and composition and timing, all the usual basics for photography we like to think we could do to a high standard. We developed quite a good reputation at the time. I think it was about 16 years Avalon was going, but the writing was on the wall for a while. It seemed quite clear that the advertising side was going to tail off, and we looked for something else and diversified back almost into portraiture. And because it's so difficult to make things pay in a very expensive studio, I decided to contract into my own working from home. Which is proved quite good, really. I've been able to do most of the work I could do before with the idea of hiring should I need to for studios, but that's been a rare necessity. But I've done a lot of weddings, babies, families, all the sort of thing that the social photographer would do. And as I was doing an exhibition for baby photography, one of the exhibitors there was Wendy Edmondson, who runs Aqua Babies, and Wendy asked me, have I ever photographed underwater? At the time I said, quite honestly, I've only ever done one shot underwater, and it was an advertising shoot I did for AstraZeneca. It was a drug for treating asthma, and it needed a shoot doing of a little girl underwater in an outdoor swimming pool. And I hired a camera and housing, and I did it using natural light. But of course Wendy's requirement was not using natural light. I had to light it. So that was one of the biggest challenges, how to go about lighting babies and toddlers and families underwater in a swimming pool.
Perhaps we can talk about that a little bit more in depth when we get going. Let's. I'm just going to hand over to your screen in a minute. Just got to be a heads up really. There are images in this presentation with mild nudity, because it's 1 o'clock in UK time. I just need to give you the heads up on that. I'm sorry. So if you're under 18, you should go and get permission, which just sounds like a joke nowadays. But again, we've got to say that kind of thing. Ian, I'm just going to swap across to your screen and we'll get to start to see some of you.
Click on my slideshow, which should keep running. and it should go between both types of work.
So again, you said how you got into the underwater photography. Obviously, because you were having to kind of begin this idea from scratch when this, you've been approached by somebody about taking these images below the water level. What was your initial ideas? I mean, did you have ideas, or did you do some research beforehand? How did you get going with it?
Yeah, well, my initial idea was the first starting point for most underwater photographers is an interest in scuba diving, which I don't have, and I'm not even that good a swimmer. And so I'm thinking, right, do I actually need that sort of enthusiasm for scuba diving, or can I approach it from square one and think about it more from an advertising photographer's perspective? So that's what I did. I really thought, now, I think the most important thing, as is the case in most photography, is lighting, in my opinion. So what do we get? What options do we have? Underwater we have special underwater lights are available, which are generally attached to a camera in a housing, and basically, in my opinion, they are just a means of getting light onto your subject. They're not aesthetically that important, not seen as that important. So I thought, well, what is the best way of lighting a subject? It's usually the sun, isn't it? And what do we get with the sun? We usually have a sort of a sky with an overall brightness and maybe a more direct light from the sun directly. And so I thought, well, I think what I need to do is work out a way of lighting these subjects which are underwater in a way that they might be outdoors. So the biggest challenge, once I've set that as the task, is firing the flash and operating the camera. That's quite tricky, because underwater firing the flash that's above water is a challenge in itself, because you don't generally have the opportunity to have cables connected. You basically got the option of radio, infrared or direct light. And I did a bit of research. I asked someone I've known for quite a while, some of you may know him, David Kilpatrick, for his advice. David Kilpatrick edits a few photographic magazines, and he's an extremely helpful chap. And he's been helping me with getting the equipment sorted out. My early days were using probably a camera that wasn't really good enough, but it did the job quite well for its limitations, and that was a Canon G6. A G6 is an early stage of the G series of cameras, and my latest one is a G14. And funny enough, in some ways the 14 isn't as good as the 6, but nevertheless the features that it has, which I find useful, are the ability to watch a live image on a screen, have a screen which is articulated so you can see it from above the water. I did not want to get my head wet. Now there's a bit of a novelty, underwater photography without getting your head wet, isn't it? But I realised that the camera doesn't actually need to be very deep under the water, under the surface, in order to get the results that I'm looking for. Only really probably no more than a foot under the surface of the water. So I've got a camera with a swiveling screen which shows me a live view, and it's important to have a camera where there isn't a delay from pressing the button to it actually firing, and quite a lot of cameras, even though they may have a live view, still have a delay. So that's important, and of course it needs to fire the flash, and in certain circumstances you attach, if you set the camera to manual settings, then the screen behaves as if it's an ambient light, and because there's not a lot of light, it goes very dark. So there's another criterion for your camera screen: it needs to stay bright. There are other bits. I don't want to bore you too much with too much technicality, but getting it all working is not a straightforward business. My latest camera is a Sony Alpha 58, which does the job pretty well. And I've had it modified. I've had the housing modified, which is a UA marine housing. I've had it modified by the manufacturers to accommodate the swiveling screen at the back. So it's all pretty much customized and does an excellent job. Very good quality. Do you need to ask me any more, Mark, before I go on and on? Are you there, Mark?
Sorry, Ian. Yeah, sorry, I was getting engrossed in what you were saying. So the first things that are kind of coming through, is this in an outdoor swimming pool or an indoor swimming pool, or what are you, where are you shooting as a rule?
I'll describe it. Yes, most of the work I do underwater, if not all of it, is in one particular pool which has been designed especially for teaching babies to swim. It's very, very warm water. It's about 34 degrees C, and it's relatively shallow, comes up to my chest. In some ways, being so shallow can be a disadvantage for adult pictures. They are somewhat restricted in how deep they can go. So I do have to work to some extent within the restrictions of the pool, but it's perfect for children. It's not far from me in the Manchester area, in Timperley in Manchester. The Aqua babies, the people who I work alongside, have 7 different pools that they do their teaching in, and in theory I could probably go into any of them, but in practice, because of the safety aspect, it makes sense to use one and the same one.
So getting starting with babies underwater, what's your tips and tricks for that?
Right. Before we go into tips, I think I did mention safety. It is absolutely paramount, for obvious reasons, that everything that you do is safe when you're around children and people in general. So we've got aspects of safety which I can talk about. The lighting is one obvious one. You've got electricity. You need to make sure that electricity is well away from the water, away from splashing, away from possible being knocked over, and it needs to have residual current devices to trip should anything untoward happen with the current. And it needs to be fastened so that should anything fall over, then it will not fall and fall into the water. So that's the obvious safety aspect. Now the other aspect, which is probably less obvious, is that you need to have people handling the babies who know what they're doing, not just anybody. If you were to hand over the baby to go underwater and be left on their own, as most of these are, to a parent who knows nothing about it, you are asking for trouble. It would be dangerous and definitely not recommended. The people who I'm working with are instructors first of all, but they've also been trained on how to release the baby and retrieve the baby in the minimum amount of time. Really, it might look like they're swimming along and have all the time in the world, but in fact they're under the water usually no more than 1 second. So they are placed in the water, the instructor moves out of the way rapidly and comes back the instant I've fired the flash, and that is the safest way of doing it. And also the babies are being observed to make sure that they're not in distress, and if they are in distress we don't force them to do any more. We would remove them from the pool if they were in a state of distress. So it's not a DIY job really at all, and the lighting is tricky. Could be done outdoors without extra lighting, but in terms of babies underwater, certainly under the age of 3, I would not be advocating it unless you have someone who is really very well trained to handle them.
Cool. You talked about flash, so let's stay on that for a minute if we can, Ian. Why have you gone for powered flash and not portable flash?
Only because I thought the power would need to be great. We're talking about a loss of light in the water, probably one stop travelling through the water. We're talking about the need to have a reasonably good depth of field, because you've not got a lot of time to do focusing, so that in there your focusing might not be absolutely bang on, so you need an inherent high depth of field, so a relatively small aperture. I have been using an ISO of 200. I've been using a shutter speed which is pretty arbitrary in a way, but set by the camera to some extent, of 60th to 125th. But ideally I want an exposure which is around about 4 or 500th of a second. So if I were using continuous light, I'd be looking for 4 or 500th of a second. With flash, of course, you are down to the duration of the flash, and I'm not 100% certain, but I can set it to 500th with broncolor flash. I could go faster, I'm sure, with portable flash, but will I get the power? I don't know. You can perhaps advise me on that.
Okay, you'd interest in that. Just a bit of a tip on that. It's a stop for every foot you lose, in fact, if it goes deeper in exposure and things, really. So for anybody who's a diver out there and you are using flash off surface with it, what's the benefit of water clarity? Can you explain a little bit about the water? Because obviously you're working in 34 degrees. You've got kids splashing and sploshing all over the place. What's the biggest kind of nightmares for you?
Yes, it's important that the water is very, very clear, and that can be arranged by the pool itself, keeping it free of people for at least a full day before the shoot, possibly more than that. And it needs to be free of air bubbles that are suspended in the water. You know, occasionally you can get air in your water supply at home just through your taps, and it becomes like milky. Well, that can happen in a swimming pool, so you've got to make sure that doesn't happen. And it's rare, but it has happened before, and it was a minor disaster when it did happen. So what happens if you do get things suspended in the water? It's not just bubbles. You can get skin floating around. You can get makeup dissolved. There's all sorts of things that could pollute the water. That will make it foggier, and it will actually catch the light and give what's called backscatter, which can come from either light behind or even in front of the subject, and it can just look like you're photographing through one of those snow dome things that you get for Christmas that you shake up and you get bits floating around. You definitely don't want that. So clear water is of utmost importance.
So could you go down to the local... Sorry, Ian, could you go down to the local swimming pool and do this kind of photography?
Well, if you were allowed, you might be able to. You'd be risking it with regard to the water clarity. You'd obviously need to get permission from people, and that's hard to come by in a public place. So it's highly unlikely you'd be allowed to do it unless you had the pool to yourselves. I have done it in a public pool with just a few people who had the pool to themselves. I have done it, and it was a pool with a lot of natural light, so it's feasible. But you are running risks of cloudy water spoiling the picture. And of course, there's the background as well, which we haven't mentioned. Now, you notice all my pictures have got a background behind. It's not the side of the pool.
Yep.
You could choose to use the pool's background, which might well be, it's usually tiles, very small tiles, and that would probably be alright. But the one advantage I have with what I'm doing, the way I'm doing it, is should the instructor still be in the picture at the background, which is quite often the case, they haven't quite moved away fast enough, then it's a very easy job to clone in some extra background. Whereas if you've got a geometrical pattern behind, you're not going to easily clone in another background. So just bear that in mind.
So what are you using? Are you using a background then? Are you immersing a background in there?
Yeah, I've got some vinyl from Studio Workshop. Sorry, not Studio Workshop. What's it called? Studio Workshop's the broncolor place. Studio Decor. They supply vinyl backgrounds for photographic use, usually white, but they do supply different colours, and this one is a sort of a lagoon type colour, and it comes on a stiff tube. It's very good.
Cool. So how big is that background in all?
It's 3 meters wide, but you can have it turned around if you so wish. We started off with a almost 3 meter square one, and I decided I needed more width, especially when you get larger groups in. You need a bit more width, so you don't have to have them right against the backdrop. So we've had another one made which is 3 meters the other way, so but much longer, probably 12 meters now.
Okay.
So the full width of the pool and coming 3 meters towards you.
Great.
And it needs to be weighted down.
Okay, with divers' weights and things, or with just something that will stay down?
Yeah,
or what?
yeah. The divers' weights. Yes, they're quite heavy lead weights. And I put screw eyelets in, which you can. I bought the device from John Lewis to make holes.
Okay.
And so I tie it through with string.
You mentioned that you're using, was it the Sony Alpha at present, you said, was it?
Yes.
Is that a DSLR or is that a DSLR?
Yes, it is.
It is it?
Yes, it is, and I'm using a 20mm lens on it, fixed focal length.
Why a 20mm lens?
You need to be slightly wide angle. You need a wide angle lens because the water magnifies, and if you're further away, you've got, apart from the issue of getting back far enough in the pool, you're looking through more water. So the less water you're looking through within reason, the clearer it's going to be. So a wider angle, but not so wide as to distort badly.
You talked about the kind of working with kids and babies and things really. When you start to work with adults in a pool, obviously you're looking more of an artistic kind of thing and so on. We've seen some amazing images going through and so on. Can you explain a little bit of the difference in the setup to it and so on compared to shooting kids?
Well, obviously it's more relaxed about leaving them to their own devices to some extent. We assume they can fend for themselves, which the babies can't do. I usually try to assess just how comfortable people are underwater, and opening eyes underwater is pretty important to get a good result. If someone couldn't open their eyes underwater, then you're limited. You'd probably be obligated to shoot them side on rather than straight on, so that you're just seeing the shape rather than their eyes. So keeping their eyes open is important. I think, well, as you can see from that one that's there now, some people will be more at ease in a state of semi-nakedness underwater than others, so I have to assess just how people feel about that. It's not super critical that they swim with nothing on but the material, but it generally works better if they can do. And so they need to be comfortable with that. These, by the way, are upside down. You notice that?
Yep. The material that you're using, is it a special material or anything? Or?
Well, the material I've just sourced from a haberdashery, and it's just whatever took my fancy, to be honest. Something that you definitely don't want something that's going to shed loads of fibres, because that'll clog up the filter system, and you won't be thanked for that. In fact, I wouldn't be asked back again if I was doing that. So it needs to be fairly tight, and I have sealed the edges of some. When you tear it, it can become frayed, so I've sealed it with heat. I just run a flame over the edge to stop it fraying any further.
And are you booking these models specifically, or are they clients, or what are they? The adults that we're seeing? Right,
most of them are that you're seeing here are volunteers who've done it just for the love of it. There is the odd one or two who have paid me to actually be photographed. and there is a real cost in running the pool. So I can't now. I used to originally just call on favours to use the pool, but now I have to be prepared to pay, and so too do my clients. So it adds probably about £100 onto what they would normally pay me for a portrait.
And is that for what, an hour session, or what kind of thing? Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah, you could get. I would charge £75 for half an hour, and £100 for an hour. And they would be pretty exhausted in an hour. You know, it's quite a tiring thing to be doing, constantly going under the water, holding your breath, and repeating it over and over. Probably in an hour I would expect to get, or maybe out of it all, 12 good pictures that would be usable. There'll be lots which aren't so good. It's a case of really try it, see what it's like, then think about how they can go about it in a different way to improve it.
What about post-production of things? How much post-production?
Yeah, there is quite a lot. Certainly there's, with the babies, it's removing the instructors who are quite often lurking in the background. Sometimes you get creases in the background which doesn't stay perfect, and sometimes have to ease those out a little bit. I've got actions to completely reset the settings for the colour, the contrast, vibrance. All these things all are terrible out of camera. It does look awful underwater out of camera. And I set off with the intention of getting at least the skin tones looking good. What tends to happen is the water takes out the red out of the colour. And so in order to make skin tones look okay, and looking at these last two, these are looking a bit anemic, but in order to get them looking okay, you need to add red. And when you add red, it very often makes the hair look excessively ginger. And people are very worried about ginger hair. They don't like having ginger hair. So when I post them online for the clients to order, I put a sort of disclaimer, if you like. Don't worry about the excessively red hair. I will adjust that when you make your order. If I did it on every one, I'd be doing sort of 400, 600, 700 images, and I wouldn't want to do that on every one, but I'll do it before they get their print order.
Cool. So can you explain a typical working session for us? So in other words, you're going to do babies, and you're down at the pool. Are you shooting lots of them at once, or are you shooting just the clients who are booking you? Can you explain a little bit about the whole the business side of things for us?
Yes. All of these babies and toddlers are part of the Aqua Babies teaching session, and they have to have attended a certain number of courses before they're deemed safe to go underwater for long enough to be photographed. So that's the first stage of qualification. Then they will be told, all the people on these courses will be told that there is a photo session being organised, and it's usually one day, sometimes 2 days, and they book in advance and they pay a fee to attend. I'm not even sure what it is, but it varies. Actually, it varies according to the time that they've been allotted. You have a basic session, an enhanced session, and one that's even longer. The basic session is a quarter of an hour, where half a dozen babies will rotate probably half a dozen times each in that quarter of an hour. So each one gets, if they stay happy, each one will get 6 immersions, and from them we hope to get 4 good pictures, but we don't guarantee it. So they may even only get 1 good one, but we like to think we get more than that. And as they're going through, we grade them according to how good we think the shot is. We call them an A, B or a C. The A is first class, nothing wrong with it at all. The B is still usable, but maybe has a limb just going out of the picture or something. And the C is not a good shot, needs reshooting. So someone is taking a tally of all these things while the shoot's going on, and they will be able to feedback whether a certain person has had enough A's and B's to be able to release them to go away. And if they haven't, then we'll assess whether they can come round again, or if they're not happy, then we will even consider offering them another complimentary session at another date. So that's how that works. They've paid their fee to join the photography session. They don't have to order, there's nothing included. If they order, they then order online. We use Everybody's Smile, and we have a gallery which is password protected for each session, and the people can order online. I give them an incentive to order within 2 or 3 weeks, when I give lower priced early bird prices, after which the prices go up a little bit, and they will stay online probably for a little over a year. But most of the ordering gets done before the early bird runs out. And people can order unframed prints if they wish. They can order canvases. They can order 2 types of acrylic. There's one that's we call a crystal acrylic, which you can see through the images behind the acrylic. And there is what we call an ultimate acrylic, which is a laminated image, laminated print with a border of about a 4-inch matte vinyl. And we also do greetings cards.
Brilliant.
Anything more?
Yeah. How do the clients? Are you kind of giving them the idea about big images for the wall and so on, or what's your kind of sale process? Are you taking samples down with you, or what are you doing? Can you explain that?
That's a good question. On the day of the shoot, there is a sort of viewing area behind a window, and in that area there's a display of all the print options we have, including some large vinyls and canvases and so on. And there will be someone talking to them to extol the virtues of the larger prints in a soft sell way. And interestingly, before this last session that we had, I used to put up a portable display board, and it wasn't really big enough to hold the largest images all that well. And I've been stressing a few times that we ought to have them on the wall, rather like they might do at home. And the last session we did that, and I must say the value of the orders has gone higher.
Yeah, I bet it's gone much, much higher, isn't it? It's like that, unless they see it, they can't buy it, theoretically,
That's right.
Isn't it? Okay. Yeah. Are you ever been rewarded?
Before I forget.
Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, before I forget, I forgot to mention, we also have an incentive to order a 15 by 10 or larger, in as much they will get a low resolution, suitable for online use copy if they order 15 by 10 or larger. And we even offer a digital copy if they order 15 or 10 first, 15 by 10 first. They can then order a digital copy for £60. A high-res digital copy for £60.
Do you find a lot of people buying digital copies nowadays?
Thankfully not. I don't really want to sell lots of them, to be honest. I'm sure most photographers would rather not. But we were getting pestered so much, I thought, well, I'll make it available, but they do have at least to order a print first. They can't just order a straight digital one.
Great. Can we step backwards a minute, just going back to the focusing? And you talked about you were kind of pre-focusing, was it, or what?
Well, not really. No, I suppose it's sort of pre-focusing. I sort of follow focus on the bit that's dangling into the water, not the faces. But ideally, I want to be able to focus the instant they're put in the water and to then follow the focus, because they can move, you see, they can shoot towards you, it is a challenge getting the focus bang on, and occasionally I find that it's focused on the trunks, not the face, you know, and that's really frustrating should that happen. That does occasionally happen, but most of the time it seems to be okay.
Great.
And that's an issue for a camera as well. Its capability to focus rapidly and to keep tight on a face.
So you mentioned that you're really working in water, but you're not physically underneath with them. You know, have you ever gone?
My head isn't anyway.
Your head isn't. Have you ever thought about going down with them with a snorkel and things, or?
Yeah, and I have done that.
Yeah.
Yes, I have done that. I don't really like it because I'm in the water for 5 hours at a time. You know, and also the fact that I'm above the water means I can communicate with the instructor directly, and we can time it to 1/10 of a second when she's going to let go. She lets go and she shouts, "Go!" At that instant I fire the shot. I'm not waiting till I find the beautiful composition. I get it composed, and then as soon as she says go, she's let go and I fire it, and then she grabs the baby again. There isn't any time for any pondering about anything, and I think if I'm under the water waiting to see her go out of the way, that'll delay it a little bit further.
When we're seeing the kind of some of the adult nudes and the kind of the cloth and everything else with it, have you got a very specific thing in mind? Are you working on a project for yourself at present or anything, or is it just a bit of fun, or is it really to try and attract in more clients to actually come and have a paid shoot with it? So in other words, I think the question is there more money in the babies than there is with the adults?
Well, there's certainly more money in the babies because you won't get that many adults. I have advertised it, and I've had a few people put off by having to pay £100, you know, which is hardly going to break the bank, is it? I think there are fewer people who are wanting to be photographed as adults underwater than our babies. So I'm never going to delude myself to thinking that that's going to be a real money spinner. And as in many aspects of photography, Mark, you're always one who's good at making money out of it. I've never been as good as you. I'm doing it really because I just want to do it.
Yeah, and you can see why, because it's great fun as well, isn't it? You know. Okay. Oh, yeah. What kind of aperture are you running at? Did you say? You didn't say the exact aperture.
I didn't say, did I? But it's 6.3 to 7. If I can get 8, I'd be delighted.
Okay, brilliant. Right, let's hand over the questions to Jay. Ian, thanks very much for sharing those images. It's absolutely brilliant. Let's see if Jay's got some questions from the panel first before we kind of carry on today. Jay, anything there?
Yes, I've got some questions that have been coming through that I've kept that I think are quite relevant. You mentioned obviously that you're using now you're using the Sony Alpha. So quickly on that, do you know if it's? I'm not familiar with the camera. Is it a full frame sensor or is that a crop sensor, Ian?
No, it's cropped. It's 1.5 times the focal length if you want to have the equivalent of 35mm. So yes, I'm using. I suppose I'm using say about a 28mm effectively on a full frame.
And a nice question that's come through actually, and I think I was going to ask you this question anyway. Obviously you've been doing this for a while now and you've got your kit together and what you're using. How does somebody get started? You know, what are they basically looking at? Never mind the safety elements, we're going to reiterate that again, but kit-wise, you mentioned that you're using the Sony G series. Are we just looking at simple cameras and simple underwater housing to start with?
And are we talking about people who want to make money at it or people who want to get some good results on their holidays?
Well, to be honest, I think you could answer both of us, for both of those really, because we're going to have definitely both of those people watching us today.
Well, clearly the resolution that you choose is going to affect the quality that you're going to end up with. The images I do now, I have a maximum size print of 48 inches, and it's not bad at that. So I'm happy with that. If I were using my earlier camera, my G6, it wouldn't be big enough for that. It's a small chip, it's very noisy, and I think the modern day cameras are much better in that regard, So, You want a camera that's going to at least give you a resolution to get the size of image that you want to end up with. But really more important than anything else is the ability for it to give you a live image that's got no delay when you press the shutter and doesn't go darker when you're under the water. You want to keep it bright, and not all cameras will do that. Even a camera that was recommended to me by David Kilpatrick turned out once you put flash on it, it had a 1/10 of a second delay between pressing the button and it firing the flash, and it clearly was no good. So even experts aren't necessarily au fait with all aspects of every camera, so you need to check it out very carefully. Whereas if you're using continuous light, now that's a different circumstance altogether, and I didn't mention it, but I have now had the task, been given the task of working out how to light these subjects with continuous light. So I'm looking for the right sort of lighting which will be bright enough to give me a 400th or a 500th of a second at f7 or 6.3, something like that. And I'm probably going to have to up the ISO, and it's a camera that's going to be capable of that. I have been told that my Sony Alpha 58 will be okay up to 1600, and I'm in the process now of testing that. But then we've got no issues about firing flash. All we need to do is get the exposure right with continuous light, which ought to be a lot easier.
Oh, that's brilliant, Ian. Thanks for that.
And we can shoot video as well, of course.
And is that something you think is the future then?
I think so. I know you're not going to get very long underwater, but if you can shoot, say, slow motion for about 3 or 4 seconds, that could be rather beautiful. If a baby's swimming along in slow motion underwater, that could be a beautiful image that could well have a saleable value, I think.
Agreed. I think I'm with you on that. A couple more technical questions, if I may. So I think I missed it, so I'm not sure if you mentioned it. Which white balance are you using for your images, Ian?
Well, as I'm shooting RAW, I'm not super bothered about it, to be honest. But I'm using daylight cloudy, the cloudy setting on the daylight on the RAW. But by the time I've messed about with it, it might have been anything really. I don't think there's any guaranteed good result straight out of the camera setting that's going to work. I have taken an encapsulated white sheet underneath the sheet of card underneath the water and taken a shot of that, and then clicked on that with the in Lightroom, or even in Bridge, or even in Adobe Camera Raw, just to neutralize it. Very often when you neutralize something and you've got skin tones involved, you end up warming it up a little bit afterwards anyway, which is what I did. But I have an action which I apply now for any new images. So once you've got it right, bearing in mind you're going to have to add a lot of red and probably take away some cyan, you should be able to get it pretty near first time every time you do a new batch.
That's great, mate. Thanks. I had a question through saying that, and actually since I've seen the question I've paid attention. A lot of the images you find that the children are actually looking at camera. Do you use anything to attract their attention?
Not specifically. We can occasionally put a toy in the water, and if the baby, it's not so much, we're not bothered about them looking at the camera too much. And maybe I've chosen those that look at the camera because I feel they're probably slightly more appealing, more engaging, but certainly not every shot has to be looking at the camera. But if they're looking away completely, then that's bad news, of course. Sometimes they're interested in the camera, sometimes they're looking for the instructor, sometimes they're looking for their mothers. There's no guarantee which way they're going to look, and you can engineer it to some extent. And this is where, to some extent, the skill of the instructor comes in, because they will put them in the water, find that they've done something, maybe they do it more than once, and then they counteract it. Sometimes their heads bob up, sometimes the bottoms go up high, Sometimes they twist around the same way every time, so they can counteract that to some extent. Sometimes they hold them under the water a little bit longer and it settles them down. There are lots of tricks from an expert instructor that can make the difference between a good shot and one that hasn't worked.
Brilliant, thanks for that. You mentioned earlier about water clarity, and somebody just mentioned that obviously with the children especially that there are a lot of bubbles, and they actually the person has written in and saying that they've had similar shots done of their own children, but they found that the bubbles were too much of a distraction. Is there a lot of post-processing going on to remove them? Is that a common thing that you find yourself?
Yeah, well, my feeling is bubbles tell you it's underwater, first of all, but clearly you don't want a massive bubble in front of the face, which can sometimes happen. People, adults and children, will release a large amount of water from their mouths, and if it's just bad luck, you'll catch it right in front of the face. That becomes a no shot. But if you removed all the bubbles, you may as well be shooting it somewhere else. You may as well chuck them over a bed and catch them as they're flying over the bed. I don't know, but to my mind, bubbles tell you it's underwater. Same with reflections underneath the surface, which sometimes people ask for them to be removed, like the one that's up there now. You can see there's a little bit of a reflection and some bubbles. Now, to me, that tells you exactly where it is taken. As long as the bubbles aren't obscuring the face, I don't worry about them. But I do take out bubbles that are easily removed, just to make the face a little bit clearer. But if we had none at all, I don't think that would be good. What do you think?
I'm in agreement, actually. Yes, I think it does add to the image, but that's great. So we've been talking about, you've been giving people hints and tips on how to get started, and obviously you've mentioned that you work with a local Aqua Babies centre or babies. These things, I presume, and we've been asked, obviously, at most regional, so get in touch with your local swimming pools. Is that what you advise, to find out if they have anything like these going on?
Well, it's a starting point, isn't it? There are other specific organisations like Aqua Babies. There's another one called Puddle Ducks. As far as I know, they have their own nationally organised photography, and there's another organisation called Urchin Rock, which goes around many pools providing the photography for them. So you might not find there are many openings for it, but then again, I don't know your area.
Okay, brilliant, thanks. Do you need, is there, with regards to the actual session itself, are the parents signing any disclaimers or safety, with the fact that they're happy for their children to be photographed in this situation?
I do believe they signed something with Aqua Babies, and I presume the fact that they've booked on means they're happy to be there, but there is an option for them to say, I don't wish my photographs to appear in any of your publicity. So all of these pictures that you're seeing now have agreed that it's okay, but there have been people whose wishes I've respected, who do not wish anybody but themselves and obviously the people who were also on the same session to see them. But beyond that password protected viewing, nobody else will see them.
That's great. I just got a few more questions before I hand it back over to Mark. As you are saying, these sessions can up to a few hours yourself, are you wearing any kind of underwater suit for yourself in that, Ian, when you're photographing?
Yeah, nothing really specific. I've got shorts on. I've got a top which is designed to be in water. It's not just any old t-shirt. But that's it.
But by no means you don't need to go as far as a wetsuit or anything like that for the period of times.
No, well, the water's very warm, so you can pretty much go all day without any worries about getting chilled. I mean, you get chilled when you get out.
Of course, brilliant. Okay, as you mentioned that the lighting is above water, do you ever use any kind of underwater lighting in your shoots? No. I've got, I fire the flash. I didn't tell you this actually, I should tell you. I fire the flash with a hot shoe mounted flash gun. It's actually a Minolta. For technical reasons, for some reason, an old-fashioned Minolta works when possibly a newer Sony one won't work.
and all it's doing is it's set at a low power, a 16th or a 32nd at manual power, and it just fires and is picked up by a cell which is outside the pool connected to one of the lights, and that light fires the other lights. I've actually got 3 lights. I've got 2 behind me, which are soft. They're bounced off the ceiling, which is a sloping white ceiling. So they're about 8 feet above me and behind me. And then there's another light which is lighting the background. See that sort of watery shape that's going behind the babies? That's one more direct light, more of a spotlight. It's actually a Broncolor impact kit head without any modifier on it, just directly, with a barn door to stop the light spilling too much. So that's really lighting the background separately, and then the front of it is lit by 2 soft sources of light slightly off to one side, just to make it less frontal.
Brilliant. Okay. Do you ever use any color correct filters instead of relying on post-production?
No. That would simply reduce the power of the light. So since it's going to have to be changed anyway, I figure let's get as much power as possible through and do the post-production, use post-production to take care of the colour.
That's great. I just got one last question there before I hand you back to Mark for the finish there. I presume with the child and the baby element that the CRB checks have to be put in place for this type of work.
Yeah, I am CRB checked, yes.
Yeah,
and Aqua babies do ask me to do
Aqua babies. Brilliant. Well, that's all the questions I have for you at the moment, so I'm just going to hand you back over to Mark and to finish the presentation off with you.
Okay.
Thanks, Jay, for doing the questions for us. Ian, brilliant, mate. Honestly, really loved seeing all those photographs. In fact, whilst you were chatting away for Jay, I was watching all the kind of slideshow going on there. Jay's going to be posting out some links for Ian's websites. He's doing quite a lot of kind of his underwater nudes and everything else with it. He's also got some kind of specialist projects running things really. And I think you're talking about doing a quick workshop next year. Is that right, Ian?
Yes, this is going to be for the BIPP/MPA London and Essex region, which meets in Brentford normally, although I think this meeting is going to be in the pool of some member or some member's father's pool. No exact details yet, but it's going to be April, and if you follow the link there's a Facebook page, you should get the information as and when it becomes available.
Brilliant. I'll make sure that Jay puts that out for you. Guys, remember that it'd be great to actually hear your comments about Ian's work and so on. We've done a quick link on to our Facebook page there. Head over there. Tell us if this is the kind of thing that you want to see more and more of actually on our open resource learning things really. Ian, thank you so much for sparing us the time to share your kind of knowledge and your work with us and so on. It's pretty fantastic, mate. I hope everything goes well for you in the future, and please watch out on our Facebook page. We'll post it as soon as we know Ian's going to run a course. We'll kind of make a big deal of that, so at least you get first come first served kind of element. Ian, anything you want to chat about before you disappear?
No, all I can say is thank you for inviting me. I hope people found that useful.
Oh, with the amount of questions going on through here, I absolutely guarantee you they have. And again, they'll head over to the Facebook page and kind of tell us all their comments as well with it. Thanks very much, Ian. It's been absolutely brilliant. Remember, if you haven't done so already, go over to the Facebook page, like us on there. We post quite a lot of stuff each day. We're quite interactive. That's it. That's another lunch hour finished. Thanks to Ian. Thanks to Jay. Thanks to everybody joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Cheers. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.